with a growing concern over the notion that chemical and biological weapons were unaccounted for and could potentially fall into the hands of terrorists. The Department of Defense wanted to test the nation's readiness for such an emergency. In June 2001, the DoD conducted a war game called Operation Dark Winter.
Dark Winter was a major exercise that was done prior to 9/11, earlier in 2001, to look at the effects of a biological terror event. And it was kind of a scary scenario. We would lose a lot of people if a really effective bioterror event occurred.
The simulation evaluated the government's ability to respond and communicate with the public, and the exercise even included mock news reports.
Since the diagnosis of 20 smallpox cases in Oklahoma City 12 days ago, hundreds have now died, thousands have become infected.
We had to, think about things like, quarantines and martial law, and things like that. All of a sudden, our system wasn't our system anymore because we had this terrible thing going on, and we had to change. We had to, change the way we thought about things. We had to change the way the military interrelated with the civilian world, and it was really an eye-opener.
And the conclusion were tens of millions of deaths, no commerce between states, no airplane flying for 6 months, and war between Oklahoma and Texas.
Today, the world is confronting a public health emergency unlike any we've seen in over a century. We are facing a highly transmissible and deadly virus which not only claims lives but also disrupts the very foundations of our society. The American healthcare system is being taxed to the limit. Our economy is spiraling downward, and our population is being paralyzed by fear stemming from a lack of a coordinated response and a dearth of accurate, clear communication about the path forward. Our window of opportunity is closing. If we fail to improve our response now, based on science, I fear the pandemic will get worse and be prolonged. There will be likely a resurgence of COVID-19 this fall. It'll be greatly compounded by the challenges of seasonal influenza. Without better planning, 2020 could be the darkest winter in modern history. 2020 could be the darkest winter in modern history. First and foremost, we need to be truthful with the American people. Americans deserve the truth. The truth must be based on science. We have the world's greatest scientists. Let us lead. Let us speak without fear of retribution. Initially, our nation was not as prepared as we should have been, as we could have been. Some scientists raised early warning signals that were overlooked, and pages from our pandemic playbook were ignored by some in leadership.
Our lifestyle, our security, our safety depends on a delicate and unstable economy. We've created a system so complicated that we no longer understand how to control it. Oil, power, shipping, transport. We live in a complex world. And the more complex it gets, the more fragile it becomes. The system is built on a global supply chain that gets things where they're needed, just in time. We've created a house of cards. Remove just one, and everything falls apart. And what's fueling this system?
Money. Americans can spend $90 billion in a single day of shopping. Last year, 200 million people swarmed their local stores on November 23rd. We call that day Black Friday. Did you know that a flu virus can survive on the surface of a banknote for up to 17 days? One day, there will be a pandemic. It could begin during the crush of Black Friday sales. A pathogen will jump from tainted banknotes to human skin, onto food, toys, children, and loved ones. By the time patient zero feels the first sore throat, millions of people will already be infected. From this point, the breakdown will happen fast.
You know this Black Friday, you can sleep in.
All over the region.
Retailers are calling this their super 149,000 stores offering sales in the
cash sales changing hands starting on
New York. Hit the stores. The flu season is off to its earliest start.
Appears to be a previously unknown variant of the flu. Suspected case catching many experts off guard.
Today I was feeling like maybe
Back on the breaking news, leading with unconfirmed reports of a smallpox
outbreak is a highly rehearsed scenario.
And National Guard units converging on a hospital in central
Manhattan. The bridges are closed. It's smallpox is a very real danger.
More than a
There's not enough vaccines.
Let me stop you there. This is not a panic situation.
An entire American city was
known as green poison, Central Park has been converted to a mass burial ground.
Power outages, gas line leaks, fires. The government
We're expecting another night of widespread looting.
The people of New York are begging
What would happen?
any available units. Fire and house in the
Our first responders are either dead
No resources available.
being treated like animals.
It's not a job. We're not trained for that.
Samples of the original green poison pathogen, the ones we recovered off the currency used as a primary transmission vector, let us take a closer look at the virus's basic genome. What I found was clear evidence the bug had been manufactured. There's genetic material there from a half-dozen other pathogens, bolted onto smallpox to make a more efficient killing machine. One of the things that makes a virus lethal is adaptation. Rapid mutation makes it harder for antibodies to identify and drugs to kill. What we're seeing in the samples you pulled from the population at the train yard is the degree of genetic drift green poison is already experiencing, and it's significant, which means it'll be that much harder to find a vaccine. What you're looking at is the smallpox virus. It normally takes 1 to 2 weeks for it to incubate in a host, and it's not contagious while it's doing so. Looking at Amherst's notes, it's clear he wanted to change that, to make green poison infectious while it developed and to speed up that incubation process to make it spread faster. In English, it's more contagious and it reproduces faster. And that's bad. We've got confirmation that green poison wasn't bred. It was coded. Specifically, he picked up on his buddy Chernenko's research about modifying virus genomes in a virtual space, kicked it up a few notches, and fed the result into an industrial protein replicator. What came out the other end was a working virus, one he could keep tweaking to achieve maximum effect. By which I mean, dead people.
What you're looking at is the smallpox virus, one of the deadliest pathogens on the planet. For centuries, it did a wonderful job of helping keep the human population in check. But times change, and sometimes Mother Nature needs a hand in improving her creations. Like, say, speeding them up a little bit, making them contagious when they should be quietly incubating in a host, or making them more lethal. I didn't come up with the approach on my own. My friend Vitaly is one of the pioneers in the field, and the idea has been around for years. Genome as data. You see, once we digitized DNA, we made it infinitely mutable. We could do 1,000 virtual variations in the time it used to take to grow a 1 lab-grade generation of pathogens. And we could pick the best, most lethal combinations and make them real. That's how you make a killer virus, you see. Mix in genetic code from other diseases, and you move the sliders all the way up on lethality and virulence. The goal was a 90% mortality rate. I'm not sure my green poison is going to quite hit that, but honestly, that's just details. As long as most of humanity goes, the Earth stands a fighting chance.
Day 1. Hospitals will reach capacity. Panic will strike. Day 2, quarantine zones will be established. Resources will be rationed. Transport will go into lockdown. Day 3, international trade will stop. The oil will dry up. The stock market will collapse. Day 4, the power will fail. The shelves will be empty. The taps will run dry. And once hunger and despair take hold, people will do anything for survival. By day 5, everyone will be a potential threat.
In 2007, a new presidential directive was signed quietly into law. This maps out the government's response to a crisis, a plan to cope with a real dark winter. It is known as Directive 51. There are rumors of shadow agencies, sleeper cells, covert agents, but nothing can be confirmed.
Our complex world is primed for breakdown.
And once the chaos strikes,
there won't be resources to save us all.
The only question left is, what will it take to save what remains?
They said it was just the flu. But it turned out to be something else entirely. We followed our orders. Isolate the sick in a quarantine zone in the middle of Manhattan and stop the contagion from spreading. We started to lose count of casualties. We built a wall to contain the sick. But we lost control of the situation. And that's when the power went out. Rioting, looting, chaos. They ordered us to pull out all troops within a few hours. We left everything behind, in a zone saturated with contamination. We left our best equipment, our most powerful weapons, and the only hope for a cure. Few dare go over the wall. And fewer still come out. We call this place the Dark Zone.
It's hard to watch something you love destroy itself, to see it fall apart. Disaster always feels so distant, detached. Someone else's struggle in some faraway place. It's not until it's in our city, at our doors, that we realize how fragile we are.
Technically, technology is what's killing the planet. But that's not really the case. It's the greed that drives the technology. But a funny thing happened on the way to $100 genome maps and 3D printed plastic toys. Someone figured out those technologies could be repurposed, modified for the greater good. Me. Now, my virus is going to do what nature's always done. Decide who lives and who dies. And if nature decides I die, then I die. If nothing else, I'll have a lot of company. Natural selection at its finest, helped along by a little unnatural genetic manipulation. It's all data, really. Life's just a method of processing it. The same way I processed the smallpox genome on my laptop. And who's to say that wasn't the plan all along? If, by some miracle, you survive green poison, then nature's decided you deserve to live. The rest of us shouldn't and won't. Godspeed. I'll see you in hell.
Are you aware that from 2004 to 2014, 0 people in the U.S. died from contracting measles, according to the CDC? During the same time, 108 people died from the MMR vaccine, according to the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System. Are you aware that a 2011 study conducted by the Ottawa Hospital Research Institute found that 1 in 168 babies had emergency room visits within 4 to 12 days after their 12-month MMR vaccination, and that several children died during the study? The number of deaths was not disclosed. 1 in 168 is a lot higher than the 1 in a million vaccine injury risk that parents are told about, isn't it? Are you aware the CDC holds 50 patents on vaccines and sells $5 billion a year worth of vaccines? Are you aware that Merck's package insert on the MMR vaccine lists death as only one of dozens of possible side effects? Have any of you read a vaccine insert? Are you aware that the U.S. Congress has ruled vaccines are unavoidably unsafe? Are you aware that vaccine safety studies are almost always conducted by the vaccine manufacturers, and that none of the vaccines on the childhood schedule were tested against a true inert placebo? They were tested against an older vaccine or an adjuvant such as aluminum. Are you aware that pharmaceutical drugs under the FDA are safety tested for an average of 4.5 years prior to licensing? Vaccines are tested on average for 4.5 days prior to licensing. 4.5 days versus 4.5 years. Are you aware that a Harvard Pilgrim Hospital study funded by Health and Human Services in the U.S. revealed that less than 1% of vaccine injuries are reported? This means that more than 99% of vaccine adverse reactions are not reported or acknowledged. Are you aware that the U.S. Vaccine Injury Compensation Program has paid out more than $4 billion due to vaccine injury and death? Are you aware that Canada is the only G7 nation without a vaccine injury compensation program? The CDC uses Institute of Medicine reports to support their claim that vaccines do not cause autism. IOM's 2011 report on autism concludes, quote, "The evidence is inadequate to accept or reject a causal relationship between diphtheria toxoid, tetanus toxoid, and acellular pertussis containing vaccines and autism," end quote. Institute of Medicine's 2011 safety report reviewed varicella, tetanus, hepatitis B, and MMR vaccines. 155 health conditions were studied. In 134 cases out of 155, the literature was inadequate to accept or reject causation. Does this sound like the science is settled to you? If you are not aware of these facts, then you have no business imposing this poorly tested medical procedure on Ontario's children. And if you are aware, then you are participating in medical and scientific fraud. The vast majority of parents of vaccine-injured or killed children now know the truth. They know the science is inadequate to support claims that vaccines are safe. See paragraph above. You will not silence these parents through censorship, shaming, mandates, and manipulation. Until Health Canada authorizes an independent long-term study of vaccinated versus unvaccinated, you are wasting everyone's time. No amount of pressure from Health Canada, Public Health, the Toronto Board of Health, or the corporate controlled media will ever convince us otherwise. Our trust has been broken. In a 2018 Globe and Mail opinion piece, Neil Rao and Richard Shabazz said this: "The borderline hysteria fueled by the media and public health that greets a few cases of measles is unwarranted." Mr. Rao is a respected immunologist on the staff of University of Toronto. Dr. Shabazz recently held the post of Chief Medical Officer of Health for Ontario. Perhaps you should listen to one of your own. Congress was blackmailed into drafting the NCVIA in 1986. Does everyone know what that is? Just in case. National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act. Vaccine manufacturers were losing multiple big money lawsuits surrounding injury and death of their products. They demanded Congress pass a law to give them legal immunity. In doing so, Congress said you must do safety studies annually and you must report to Congress every 2 years. In a 2018 lawsuit, it was proven that HHS did neither of those things. No studies and no reports to Congress for 30 years. Your science has settled one-size-fits-all agenda intended to lead all citizens down the path of compulsory vaccination is in direct violation of the Ontario Healthcare Consent Act, the Universal Declaration of Bioethics and Human Rights, the Nuremberg Code, and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in the Canadian Constitution, as supported by a Health Canada statement. This is Canada. It is not Salem, Massachusetts, 1692. It is not Berlin, 1939. This will not stand. Thank you for your time.